stories, where the United States climate envoy John Kerry has announced a new controversial plan to raise cash for climate action in the developing world by selling carbon credits to companies wishing to offset their polluting emissions. Speaking at the COP27 climate summit in Egypt, Mr. Kerry said the initiative, which he said should be up and running within a year, would help finance energy transition in vulnerable countries. He said Chile and Nigeria were two countries that had already expressed interest in the scheme. But the plan has already attracted criticism because of the way it will be financed, with money raised in sales of carbon credits, which allow companies to pay for someone else to cut their planet-warming emissions instead of cutting it themselves. For more on this development, Rachel Rose Jackson, Director, Climate Research and Policy at Corporate Accountability, joins us live via Zoom from Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. Thanks for joining us on TVC News at 7. I'm curious, what really do you make of this stance by the U.S., which is believed to obstruct any meaningful outcome of the climate summit?
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I wish I could have better news, but unfortunately, this is exactly what we would expect from the U.S., the world's largest historical polluter and the world's wealthiest country. For as long as climate policy has existed, the U.S. has always been the largest obstructor of climate action. It's denied the meaningful actions and the policy mechanisms and the real finance that people across Africa and around the world direly need in order to be able to adapt to and survive the climate crisis. And just a couple of weeks ago, in the lead up to COP27, we heard Kerry proclaiming to the world that the U.S. was ready to stop obstructing, that it was ready to stop talking and start walking. And unfortunately, everything that we've seen here on the ground at COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh and the announcement by Kerry earlier today shows that the U.S. is hell-bent on doing exactly what it always has done, rolling out the red carpet and greenwashing its polluting image, declaring itself a climate champion, but being anything but. And this latest announcement today about this carbon offset scheme is truly worrying and will wreak devastation on people and land across Africa and around the world.
All right. Well, as it stands now, indigenous voices are already describing this move as humiliating. What would you suggest is done to have a meaningful consensus at this COP27?
For there to be a meaningful outcome at this COP needs to start being a polluters COP, and it needs to start being a people's COP, and a true African COP. We've heard this called the COP27 being the African COP, and it is no such thing. Let's be very clear, this COP is a COP in Africa, but it's being bought and paid for by polluting corporations and polluting countries, and it's being manipulated and spun by them in order to deliver their polluters' wish list, and it doesn't matter how many lives they have to condemn in the process. In order for this COP to deliver, world governments would need to first start by kicking out the very polluting corporations who are most responsible for climate change and most responsible for the climate impacts felt by Africans and others around the world out of this process. As long as polluters are here in these halls at COP, these climate talks will never deliver the action that people need around the world and that people in Africa are demanding as well. Secondly, in order for this COP to deliver, the countries like the US need to finally pay their overdue climate debt to people in the global South. This does not mean setting up a carbon market scheme to offload their responsibility to mobilize private finance by some of the very polluters who are responsible for climate change and to shift the burden of action onto African people and other people around the global South. That's what Kerry's plan today would do. What we need instead is for public finance directly for and by and with the people to be handed over into the hands where it's owed, not for these polluting, dangerous schemes that risk great harm to continue.
All right, Ms. Jackson.
Finally,
I'm afraid I need to quickly butt in here. What would you expect African countries to do at this time? Because they were expected to speak with one voice at the ongoing summit.
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question again?
What would you expect African countries to do at this time? Because as it is, some countries already signing up for that energy transition accelerator.
Yeah. If African governments are representing the needs of their people, then they'll be holding the US to account. They'll be refusing these carbon market schemes that just shift the burden of responsibility and the suffering and decades more of suffering and lack of energy onto their people. And they'll stand up. They won't stand up to US bullying. They'll demand the climate finance they're owed. They'll ensure that it gets the people on the front lines that they need. And they'll stop tinkering with rules of offsets or carbon markets, which are just dangerous distractions that risk the very lives of Africans and others around the world, and demand real solutions such as the technology and the capacity and the finance to be able to ensure that Africans across the continent have access to people-controlled renewable energy, for example, or have the food sovereignty that they're owed and the ability to eat and grow food. Until or unless African governments stand up to rather than enable the bullying of the US will be continued to obstruct and bully forward unchecked.
All right, then, I must sincerely appreciate you. Director, Climate Research and Policy at Corporate Accountability, Rachel Rose Jackson. Thank you for your time on TVC News at 7.
Thank you so much.